Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of a new Planning Matters season of webinars. Thank you for being here. My name is Cécile Huppert from Perspective.brussels, the Brussels Capital Region Planning Agency, and I am your host for this episode. I am part of the EU teams at Perspective, and I am joined today by my colleague Alfredo Corbalan from the EU team as well. Before we start with the actual content of today's episode and seeing that more people are joining us also, I'm just wanting to share some housekeeping information. So we are recording this episode and we will post it later on the YouTube channel of Perspective, where you can already find the 5 episodes from the previous season on non-Atlantic. Please keep your microphone muted, except when you want to ask a question, and your camera off as well if you don't want to be visible on screen during the recording. We will also share the slides to all connected participants after the webinar. And don't hesitate to use the chat for your questions, including for the speaker. We will be moderating it throughout the episode, and we'll be taking your questions during the Q&A moment after the presentation. Just a few, can you mute your microphones, please, when you enter the room? Thank you. Just a few words of introduction before we dig into the topic of the day. For those who are new here, Planning Matters is the unique European platform for exchanges between urban planning agencies from European cities. And all interested planning agencies, urban development departments of cities and urban networks are, of course, welcome to join us. Before 2024, there was no such platform at the European level, and it's our goal to bring together planning experts from European cities to cooperate at the European level, because the profession of planner is changing and we need to exchange more on common challenges, share knowledge and experiences to develop new strategies and solutions to tackle these challenges. Additionally, we realized that EU policies and regulations have an increasing impact on land use, and urban planners have to be more involved on the European level, both for cooperating together and also reaching out to the EU. So this is our aim with Planning Matters, to exchange knowledge on territorial observation, planning tools, regulation strategies, to develop common projects, to promote the importance of planning across Europe, and to engage with the EU. We are a growing community. As you can see on the map, we have now 23 members and 25 organizations following our activities. In 2026, we intend to consolidate the platform, continue the exchange of knowledge on concrete topics, and position urban planning into the EU agenda. Last year, we consulted our members, and 2 priority themes emerged from 2026, housing and planning, and land use plans and strategic plans. Hence, we have imagined this new series of 5 webinars as part of our work program for this year, focused on the links between housing policy and spatial planning across European cities and regions. There will also be a city lab co-organized by URBACT and the European Urban Initiative in October in Brussels on the topic of housing, so you can stay tuned for more information about it. In a context of housing crisis across Europe, the EU is strengthening its action on housing, including through the EU Affordable Housing Plan that will be presented today. And for urban planners, these developments are highly relevant because housing is closely linked to social, environmental, and economic priorities in cities, as well as to the non-Atlantic objective, which was Planning Matters themes in 2025, last year. Housing affordability in cities has a direct impact on urban sprawl. Urban planners, they play a key role in maximizing what already exists, prioritizing renovation and adaptive reuse instead of demolition. And they are also at the interface between EU frameworks and local realities, and it requires them to lead integrated approaches and balance territorial needs. So here you can see on the slide the whole program for our webinar season. We will be announcing the exact dates gradually. The episode today is structured around the presentation of the new European Affordable Housing Plan as an introduction to the European context and what we can expect in the coming months and years as well. We will also question the role expected of urban planners in the European Commission housing policy. And for this, I would like to welcome Lara Tobin, who is French second national expert at the Housing Task Force of the European Commission. She has worked more than 10 years designing and implementing housing policies and projects, and in particular ones concerning social housing, private degraded housing, and urban renewal. So Lara, please, the floor is yours. You can take control of the slides.
Thank you very much. So let me take control of the slides, and thank you for the presentation. I would maybe just like to add, so I'm indeed at the Housing Task Force as a seconded national expert from France, and I only arrived last December, so I'm still quite new to the Housing Task Force. So let me, is this working? Great. So I will present to you the European Affordable Housing Plan. I'll take a bit of time maybe to start this presentation to remind the context and the housing context and the housing crisis across Europe, and then dive into the European Affordable Housing Plan with a bit more focus on what I've been told would interest you most. So the topics of simplification and the Affordable Housing Act. So maybe just to start, so housing is a new topic for the European Commission. It started a bit more than a year ago when the Commission, von der Leyen, named its first ever commissioner on housing. So Dan Jorgensen, who's the commissioner in charge both of energy and housing. And with the publication and presentation of the first ever European Affordable Housing Plan last December, so it was published on the 16th of December. This first quote by President von der Leyen about housing. So a home is not just four walls and a roof. It is safety, warmth, a place for family and friends. It is belonging. But for too many Europeans today, home has become a source of anxiety. It can mean debt or uncertainty. There's another quote that dates from a bit earlier on in 2014, where our president said that, of course, if housing mattered to Europeans, then it should matter also to Europe, which I also think explains a bit why the European Commission has decided to take interest in the issue of housing, of course, in full respect of subsidiarity and the fact that it's a member state or a local competence. So first of all, just to remind you of things you very certainly know, but a few figures on the European housing crisis. So first of all, I mean, reflecting back on what President von der Leyen said, that housing matters for Europeans. These are the results of a European Commission survey, European Barometer, asking people what was or how much of a problem different topics were. So it's in cities, housing and the lack of affordable housing is by far one of the most pressing issues for citizens. So as you can see, more than half the population in cities describe the lack of affordable housing as the first most pressing issue that concerns them. And so housing is also the most pressing issue in towns and suburbs, with 37% of people describing it as a problem. Also in rural areas with 28%, though it's not maybe the most pressing issue for them. But this just describes the fact that indeed, for a lot of European citizens today, accessing affordable, and I would add adequate housing, has become difficult and very much a concern. Sorry. So some data over the span of 11 years, there's been a 60% increase in housing prices across the EU. So this is the EU average, growing faster than household income. So the other indicator that is also interesting to look at when we're looking at housing prices is the house to income, the price to income ratio. So just to give an example, in 2022, there was a peak in this price to income ratio at 107% of the long-term average. So this reflects the fact there was a big increase in prices between more or less 2014 and 2022. There's been a slight decrease since, but with income not increasing as fast as housing prices, and therefore housing becoming more unaffordable for households. The same is true of rents. Average rents have grown by 20% over the same period. and new rents in particular have grown significantly more. So just to point out, indeed, when we measure rents, you measure average rents of contracts that are both new contracts and old contracts. And so that can hide a little bit of the growth of the price of new rents. Since 2021, there's also been an important decrease in the numbers of residential building permits, with a decrease by 22% in that number. 20% of the housing stock in the existing housing stock is not used at its full potential, with these 20% of the housing stock not occupied as usual residencies. So that might be both secondary residences, STRs, vacant housing. This category covers a variety of different things. And this last figure, 1 million people are homeless, including more than 400,000 children. So this really reflects I'd say the aggregate measures of the housing crisis across Europe, and both in terms of construction, in terms of prices, and also in terms of accessibility to housing for the most vulnerable, with this figure of 1 million homeless people. Of course, these averages hide specific challenges. So just to name a few, affordability pressure is not the same in all areas across Europe. It's obviously much higher in areas of growth in cities, also in some tourist hotspots where prices have been increasing faster than average. These affordability challenges are obviously impacting low-income households much more than high-income households, with often very high shares of expenditure and a housing cost overburden rate, which is particularly high for the most vulnerable. And these affordability challenges affect those who are trying to enter the housing market more than those. So both people who are trying to rent a flat, or who are looking to buy a new home, for which the affordability issues are much higher than for those who are already in the housing market, either because they bought earlier on or they already have a rental contract. So just to illustrate these issues of affordability, you can see here a map that was established by the Joint Research Centre of the European Commission, comparing affordability. So basically looking at what surface of housing you can pay or you can rent, using a third of disposable income. And so this shows that in particular in the Eastern countries, the affordability issue is very, very strong. As you can see, countries like Poland, Czechia, Slovakia are able to buy, people with a third of disposable income, you're able to buy very, very little. Well, you're able to rent small surfaces. So the consequences of this housing crisis, the housing crisis, is multidimensional. Just to point a few, the impact on demographics, there are now studies correlating housing affordability and fertility. For instance, there are now well-known health and well-being implications, in particular between access to adequate housing, so quality, sufficient size housing, and health outcomes. It also constrains economic growth and mobility. If you can't change house, then you might not be able to move to get a new job or to find a better job. And of course, housing also is at the heart of sustainability and environmental concerns, with by and large housing and the residential sector responsible for a large share of greenhouse gas emissions. So obviously the question is, why is there this housing crisis? And so by and large, the housing crisis is due to an increase in demand, which has not been met by a sufficient increase in supply, and has led to increasing prices. So amongst the factors that explain this increase in demand, economic factors, household wealth and income going up, mortgage and credit conditions which are changing, meaning that households can borrow more money and for cheaper. Also demographic changes, so just the increase in population, urbanization, but also a change in the structure in families, with households being smaller in size and therefore needing more dwellings. There are some capital flow mechanisms which also have been evoked, though there's obviously a lack of data to properly quantify them. And what will be maybe more interesting for us, also the important increase in the number of short-term rentals. And policy also influences housing transactions through taxes, subsidies, tax relief, etc. So this is just a map to illustrate the issue of short-term rentals. So this map reflects the density of short-term rentals in each NUTS 3 region. So density expressed in the number of short-term rentals per square kilometer, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just, yes, per square kilometer. So as one can see, on average, the number of short-term rentals in Europe only represents about 1% of the housing stock. But as you can see, there are really some short-term rental hotspots where the density of short-term rentals is much higher. And so we know that in some areas, for instance, short-term rentals can represent up to 20% of the housing stock, having a much stronger impact on local housing markets in those areas than it will have on average. So as I said, the crisis comes from the fact that the supply has not met this increase in demand. So today we build approximately 1.6 million new units per year across Europe, and an additional 650,000 new units per year would be needed in the next 10 years to be able to meet both the backlog, so the dwellings that are missing today, and future demand related to both demographic growth and the renewal of the park. So delivering this extra units is estimated to cost 150 billion a year. So why is there this lack of supply? There are several explanations. One is the financial and the investment challenges. As I said, residential permits have been going down, but the investment in housing as a share of GDP has also declined over the past few years. The construction sector is facing a number of challenges, both declining productivity and innovation. The construction sector is characterized by the fact it's mainly very small enterprises. I think on average about three people per enterprise. There has been in the past few years a very high increase in the price of construction products and shortages in labors and skills. Also, there's the role of planning, zoning, land management, permitting, with very fragmented regulations, which have an impact both on the financial aspects of construction, what can be built. And of course, land is by nature a scarce resource, in particular in stressed areas, and therefore a costly input for housing construction. And finally, there's an issue of using our existing building stock much better. As I said, about 20% of dwellings are not used as usual residences, and there are also nearly 10% of vacant offices, which could be better used. So these are just a few elements on the European context when it comes to housing, and I'll now present to you the European Affordable Housing Plan in much more detail. So as I said in my introduction, the European Affordable Housing Plan was presented on the 16th of December. It was presented as part of a housing package, so there are also 3 other documents that were published more or less in mid-December. One was the revision on state aid rules on housing. There was also published on the 16th of December, the European Strategy for Housing Construction. And just a bit before, there was a council recommendation on the new European Bauhaus, which provide the full set of documents that comprise this housing package. So the European Affordable Housing Plan is built around 4 pillars and 10 actions. And so, as I said, I'll present all of them, but I'll maybe take a bit more time to present the pillar 1, boosting housing supply, and pillar 3, enabling immediate support while driving reforms. So the first pillar of the Affordable European Housing Act is boosting housing supply with three main actions. So the first is strengthening the productivity and innovation in the construction sector. The second is cutting red tape to accelerate housing supply. And the third is combining affordability, sustainability, and quality in housing. So the first action, strengthening the productivity, is basically what's contained in the European Strategy for Housing Construction. So there's in preparation a Construction Services Act, which aims to enhance cross-border provision of construction services. Today, construction is one of the sectors which is least provided in an international framework. I'm sorry, I'm not sure this is perfectly the right way to say it, but the cross-border services, the share of cross-border services in construction is very low compared to other sectors. This European strategy for housing construction also aims at promoting more circular economy, innovative materials and methods of construction, but also it has a focus on digitalization of procedures and construction. The second action is cutting red tape to accelerate supply. So there will be a housing simplification package, which should be presented next year. So the idea is to first to develop a mapping of all relevant EU legislation which impacts housing supply, and then trying to understand to what extent there are bottlenecks or redundancies or in this legislation that could be removed to allow a better implementation and faster procedures. This housing simplification package also aims at showcasing best practices which can exist across the EU, both on, for instance, digitalization of procedures, on fast tracking procedures for housing, looking at how actors can analyze building permits or planning permits simultaneously, and best practices also on building codes. So this is the heart of the simplification, the housing simplification package. And the last element, the last action, so combining affordability, sustainability, and quality in housing really refers to the new European Bauhaus initiative, but also elements on energy communities with the Citizens Energy Package, which was published, I think. And the idea behind this is also to prioritize renovation and repurposing of buildings rather than new builds when it's possible. So the second pillar of the European Affordable Housing Plan concerns investment, with the aim to mobilize additional public and private investment. So as I said, initially, the estimates of the additional needs and investments to meet the housing needs are 150 billion euros a year. It's obvious that this cannot be provided only by public money. So there's a need to be able to mobilize both public money and private resources towards increasing the housing stock. So at the heart of this pillar is the creation of the Pan-European Investment Platform, which aims really at bringing together both public and private sector financing and housing providers to improve access to finance for housing providers. Part of this pillar is also the revision of the state aid rules, which I said were published mid-December, to facilitate the funding of social and affordable housing. So in the previous state aid rules, there was the category of social housing, and the state aid rules have been revised to include affordable housing and the financing of affordable housing. So maybe just a word on EU funding. The preparation of the plan was also the opportunity to have a look at what the EU funds were already financing. And so there's already 43 billion euros which are targeting housing projects from the European Commission. And within the framework of the next MFF, there will very certainly be options as well. So the third pillar concerns the enabling of immediate action, immediate support while driving reforms with 3 actions. So the first is addressing short-term rentals in areas under housing stress. So currently under preparation and planned for this year is the Affordable Housing Act. So this Affordable Housing Act has basically two legs. The first is a legislative element on short-term rentals. Or today there is an element of how can I say, legal uncertainty, because local governments and member states are taking restrictions against short-term rentals, and at the same time, and these are being challenged in court on the basis of, I mean, not only, but on the basis of EU legislation. So our goal is to provide a framework which brings more certainty, legal certainty to local governments and member states who are trying to regulate short-term rentals, but also providing elements on justification and proportionality and non-discrimination. So making sure, nevertheless, that these restrictions obey the fundamental principles. The second element of the Affordable Housing Act will also aim to promote the supply of affordable housing in these areas under housing stress. So supporting member states and local governments in supporting member states and local governments in the increase of the supply of affordable and social housing. So there'll be both this legislative component and a non-legislative component. So the second action concerns speculation. So as I said, there's anecdotal evidence of speculative behaviors in the housing market. So in this action, we aim, for one, to conduct a study to see to what extent it's possible to quantify and to describe this phenomenon, and its extent, and maybe even touch at its impact on housing prices, and then to promote more transparency on real estate data, transactions, the speed of these transactions. So we'll also be working with statistical agencies to try and promote this transparency. And the last element, the last action in the plan is driving forward member state structural reforms. This is done in particular through the European semester, which is a yearly process of discussion with member states about their structural policies, and trying to promote within that framework more, sound housing policies. And so last pillar of the European European Affordable Housing Plan concerns protecting the most affected with 2 main strands of work. One is housing for young people, with actions concerning trying to promote more student housing, and also developing a guarantee scheme with the European Investment Bank for young people, and also addressing homelessness and supporting households and tenants in vulnerable situations, with in particular a council recommendation on homelessness. And so to finish this presentation, there are 2. How can I say this? Sorry. Until recently, the European Commission wasn't working on housing, and there were relatively few interactions between member states and with the Commission on housing policies. It was a topic that member states obviously invested a lot, but not necessarily much sharing of good practices between member states. So one of the very concrete impacts of this European Affordable Housing Plan is that there are now much more meetings and exchanges and discussions between member states on housing policies. And there are two elements more of governance that are going to be put in place in the framework of the European Affordable Housing Plan. The first is a housing summit. So for the first time in 2026, There will be a housing summit organized at a high level, and which aims to bring together all key actors on housing. And we're also going to put in place a European Housing Alliance, which is going to bring together member states, regions, cities, and other relevant stakeholders when it comes to housing, to promote mutual learning, knowledge sharing, sharing of best practices when it comes to housing. And so to conclude this presentation, don't hesitate to visit the European Affordable Housing Plan webpage, on which you'll find all our resources, so particularly the plan, but also the staff working document, which provides all the analysis of the housing crisis and the analytical basis for the plan. And you'll also find on this webpage the results of the public consultation, which was carried out last year in preparation of the plan.
Thank you, Lara, for this very complete presentation of the plan, and thank you also for emphasizing more on the aspects of the plan that are maybe more linked to spatial planning. Before we open the floor for questions and discussion, and I saw already a lot of activities in the chat, so I think people are quite engaged, and there are some questions already in the chat. I would just like to give the floor to Alfredo for a reaction on behalf of Perspective Brussels.
Yes, thank you, Lara. Thank you, Cécile. Thank you for the presentation. And in fact, with your presentation, we have seen the link with affordable housing and planning, and also in the plan itself, it's very clear that there is this link, and more precisely on the topic of permitting and speeding permit. That's also a concern of a new Brussels regional government that put the question of a quicker permit in its roadmap for the current legislature until 2029. Planning is permitting, but it's not just delivering permit. It's also looking for the best urban form and density. It's also trying to find the best balance between the different functions, housing being one important one, but also offices, green space for economic activity. So that's also what planning is doing as well too. So my question to you is also, or do you see this broader question of good planning for affordable housing beyond just speed planning focus? Or do you see that could be tackled in the implementation of the plan, and all urban planner could be more involved in the implementation of the plan?
So maybe two elements on the European Affordable Housing Plan, also to explain a bit of its scope. The first is that it does concentrate on on the affordable housing part. There is other EU legislation which is interested in things which are equally extremely important for affordability and for housing in general, but I'm thinking of energy performance, for instance, or the environmental aspects. So the European Affordable Housing Plan is really the focus on what we can do in terms of affordable housing, but it doesn't mean that the rest of the legislation doesn't exist. The second aspect, which is important, I think, and also to have in mind when looking at this plan, is obviously this is the European, housing and planning is and will remain a member state and a local government, a national and a local competence. And the plan has also tried to focus on what the Commission can do and the European level can do in complementary to national and local levels. And planning is very much a local competence because there is no one good answer as to how to plan or where to put what activities, and it's very much embedded in the local context. And so the focus of the plan on permitting is also because that's where we can have action, and it doesn't mean that the other elements obviously not important. So that said, maybe two elements which are important. There's also and I mentioned it very briefly, but the new European Bauhaus, which also gives some guidance well, not necessarily planning, but at least designing neighborhoods with in mind sustainability, also community participation, architectural beauty, aesthetics, etc. So that also provides some element of guidance on urban development. Coming more from an environmental perspective, obviously the Commission is very interested also in repurposing and renovation. Sometimes land uses between residential, environmental uses are presented as conflicting, but what we know is that there is still a lot of space to make better use of the existing building stock through renovations with or without demolitions, through anticipating transitions and changes also in new builds, densification, intensifying usages as well of buildings, repurposing, renovation, etc. So that's also part of the plan.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer. And now we can open the floor to question. Yes. I saw there was a hand raised during your presentation by Mrs. Elena Itura. So maybe if you want to take the floor and ask your question, the question you wanted to ask during the presentation.
Thanks. It was a question about statistics. Do you know about the concentration of the property? For example, in France, 3.5% of owners own 50% of housing, of rental housing. Is this the same in Europe?
Your microphone, Laura.
Sorry. Yes, so I know very well the study you're mentioning on the concentration of housing owners. Now, there's no EU-wide evidence on that same topic because in this study in particular, the one you're mentioning, it was actually quite hard to come up with that because it required linking both the cadaster and fiscal data. Anecdotal evidence that I have in mind from Austria, from Barcelona, and from Spain suggests similar concentration. What we will be trying to do, one of the actions of the plan concerns speculation, but more broadly, to understand speculation, we also need to understand the structure of ownership. And so the study that I mentioned earlier on hopes to shed some light on who owns housing today and for what purposes and what's going on. But also behind that is the idea of promoting more transparency on real estate data. So precisely, we have more information on the structure of ownership in other countries than France.
Thanks.
Thank you. I saw some other questions in the chat. So if the participant who asked them prefer to ask it directly, please raise your hands, and otherwise I can try to go back. The first question, which was an easy one, could you please provide the links to the Eurobarometer and GRC study? If you have them, Lara, could you maybe paste them in the chat? And then there was another question about the definition of affordable housing. Is there a legally anchored definition of affordable housing at the EU level, separate from the generally assumed definition of the 1/3 of disposable income?
So the answer is no. Certainly for social housing, for instance, the SGEI talks about social housing as housing which aims at providing housing for the most vulnerable groups, but not necessarily exclusively. So it's very it really encompasses all the national differences that can exist in what we call social housing, and it's the same for affordable housing.
Okay.
targeting more low to middle income groups. But it's defined more with respect as to who accesses these types of housing rather than how it's precisely implemented, what legal structures, what framework.
Thank you. There is another question about the GRC or the European Commission regarding impact assessments. Did you make any impact assessment regarding measures targeting the enforcement of rent caps to ring-fence unregulated increases of rents?
So rent caps are not a competence of the European Commission. So there were no impact assessments at our level. But there is now starting to be a very rich economic literature concerning rent regulation more generally, and its impacts both on rents and on supply.
Next question, I go on if nobody is taking the floor. Does the European goal of non-Atlantic conflict with the goal to boost housing supply? And I think this is a question that comes back with other European goals that are potentially conflicting with the use of housing supply increase.
Well, I would say that they are both two important issues, protecting nature and increasing the housing supply. And the issue is not whether they're competing, but how we can combine them. And that I think is requires very local answers. And I mentioned a few ways that local governments and private actors have found to increase housing without increasing land take. I talked about renovation, repurposing, densification, and intensifying usage as some of the options. But there are it's always a specific project in a specific context.
Yeah, there was another question linked to this, and also with the growing cost linked to building greener, to reuse. Is the European Commission planning to support local authorities maybe for this?
Sorry, to support them for what? For
working around this opposition between different EU policies, housing, non-Atlantic, but also the growing cost of building greener, having to take into account all these regulations and targets.
So I'm sorry because I'm not sure I completely understand the question, but the European funds already finance housing projects across the EU, not in all countries, because then it's a matter of local projects and priorities and available envelopes. But there's already 43 billion which is targeted at housing, and that will continue. But I'm not sure I completely understood the question. I'm sorry.
No worries. If
maybe I can, maybe I can specify. Hi. It was my question. I was asking mostly because of the potential conflict of where we put our public money. It will cost more to build with net zero land take and nature restoration law, etc. It might cost more to build more housing. And I am also asking this because of the different local public finance systems across European countries. In the Czech Republic, we have very little fiscal autonomy of cities and local authorities. So it is difficult to explain why we would need to pay more, or why we need the builders to apply certain levels of protection or greenery, etc., and how much it will cost to maintain them in the long term if we don't see like direct impact or positive impact on local economies here. So that was my question. Like, it will cost more. It's already costing more. and how shall we work around this? Thank you. I know it's not everywhere. I know it's not everywhere in all across Europe, but here it really is a problem. Like it's not advantageous for local authorities to pursue growth and housing growth because it costs more than it brings back to the local economy.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I really have an answer to that conundrum. I understand the difficulty you're highlighting.
Maybe if this is a topic, or if there is like I don't know, maybe a comparative study of the different
and housing
systems.
costs.
Yeah, housing costs and
construction costs.
Yes, and also like with local public finance systems, what we invest and what comes back into our public finance systems.
So I'm not aware of such a study, but I'm writing down your question and I'll ask colleagues.
Yeah, I've already started typing it, so I'll put it in the chat, but it's just so you have it written as well.
Thank you, Lucy. I saw a hand raised before, but I don't know if the person wants to take the floor.
Sure.
Yeah. Hello.
Okay, Douglas Gordon. I've been living in Helsinki for some years now and working in Tallinn as a visiting professor at the University of the Arts and Architecture. In Helsinki, our view is that cities need to step up and take responsibility right across Europe, because the webinar is Planning Matters. So I'm looking how to integrate Planning Matters with housing. And the way that it's been done in Helsinki over the past 30 years is that the city takes a long-term responsibility for a social rented building program. And this is integrated into the city plan, which is a 30-year plan. And we create then an implementation plan that says X thousand number of the house building program will be social rented, and these will be built across XYZ areas. Very simple method to integrate planning matters with housing. And that's why I think that is the way forward for cities generally, to take more responsibility for creating real housing affordability. What's your view on that?
So maybe just one element I read actually in the Planning Matters on net zero land take from last year, that in Helsinki 60% of land was publicly owned.
It's public land ownership in Helsinki is about 81%.
81%.
That's the state
okay.
and the city.
So I, to be honest, I was very interested in that figure, and I don't know to what extent it's comparable across other cities or other countries.
Well, Amsterdam's 100% of land
Amsterdam
ownership.
is 100. Okay. But of course, I mean, when you have high public land ownership, that enables steering of land development much more easy, makes it much more easy. I know that there are, I mean, other cities I have in mind, Barcelona and also Paris, which do inclusive inclusive planning, so requiring a certain share of social housing in private developments. That's also a tool which exists to promote and encourage the development of social and affordable housing.
Yeah. All I'm saying is that this is one way forward that needs to be investigated more, to link housing affordability and social rented housing with the city plan, so that it becomes a stable part of the goals of the city. And I hope the majority of us would support that, so that we can see how we integrate planning matters with housing. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon.
Maybe we carry on with the next questions.
Yes.
There are a question as well. What incentive could be provided to redirect private investment toward renovating existing buildings? If maybe it's a very precise question.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I have a good answer to that.
Yeah, also on the existing stock, what kind of action, or is there any action that are proposed to use the 20% of existing dwelling not used today as usual residence, or to work on this stock of housing that are right now?
Yeah. At the European level, there's a study which is currently being undertaken on repurposing of buildings and the reuse of vacant housing and vacant buildings generally. So really in an idea, I think, of promoting best practices and showcasing various situations. Of course, then there are things, many actions which are taking place across member states today and which are not of EU competence. Some countries, for instance, tax vacant housing in stressed areas, and that's a policy which has been evaluated and which has rather positive effects on reducing the stock of vacant housing. There are also, and I think it's the case here in Brussels, there's public management of vacant housing. So if housing remains vacant too long, then the public authorities can take over. So there are examples across the EU of local governments taking action, local and national governments taking action against vacant housing to encourage it to come back in the stock.
So the idea of the plan is also to make a link and exchange expertise and practices on different.
Yes, I mean, as I said, the Commission isn't. I mean, the housing isn't a EU competence. So what we nevertheless can do at European level is promoting best practices, sharing experience, showcasing what works in certain contexts and why, and encouraging others to take those ideas and see whether they're relevant for their local context and trying to implement them.
Okay, thank you. Maybe a last question that hand raised by Stephanie.
Yes.
Stephanie Weber.
Hopefully you can hear me. Stephanie Weber from ICLE Europe. I'm kind of cheating because I wrote on the chat, but more on the institutional side of things. I would be curious actually to hear why it was DG Enner who actually led and developed paving the way for the affordable housing plan and not DG Regio, especially given that I imagine that these 43 billions that you had mentioned, Lara, are also partially structural funds and probably also cohesion funds, which borderline for housing, but still. Happy to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Yes, so indeed the 43 million are overall all kinds of all European funds. So I must admit I do not know what the debate was about where the housing, which DG should host housing. As I said, I joined the Commission in December, and so I don't know how that choice was made. I think there were several. I mean, housing is a cross-cutting topic. And it could have made sense to host housing in DG Regio, but also in other DGs as well.
Okay, we are reaching our hands, so maybe just a last question, which make a bridge with our next edition of the Planning Matters. It was a question about the next plan short-term rental act. What specifically is planned for the short-term rental in the Affordable Housing Act?
Yes, so as I said, the current situation is that there are a lot of local governments and national governments regulating short-term rentals. And these regulations, restrictions have been challenged in court. And some of these challenges use EU law, in particular the Services Act, to challenge these restrictions by saying that these restrictions contravene the principles of the Services Directive. Sorry, it's a directive. But there have also been rulings of the European Court of Justice, which say that indeed, as long as it's justified and proportionate, there can be local restrictions to the free provision of services. So by and large, we're trying to provide some legal clarity on that. So taking what exists already, and what has been ruled by the European Court of Justice, and so that local governments and national governments know within which framework they can safely implement restrictions, or I'm saying restrictions very generally. They take multiple forms today. The way local governments are trying to regulate or restrict SDRs. So that's what we're trying to do.
Okay.
It's planned for this summit. So there'll be a call for evidence, which should be published very, very shortly on this topic. So if you're interested in short-term rentals, I can only invite you to take part in the call for evidence.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there are a lot of questions on the chat, but the time is short now, so I give the floor back to Cécile.
Yes, thank you. I think I was kicked out of the webinar for the moment. So
Yes, I have the feeling
too. It didn't create problems here. Anyway, thank you everyone for being with us today for the first episode of this Planning Matters 2026 program of webinars, and thank you, Lara. Also for your clear explanation of the affordable housing plan and for the answers to the question. There were numerous. I think we were about 120 participants in the end, so it shows a great interest for the subject across Europe. And I think I can also say on behalf of the group of participants here that planners stand ready to cooperate with the Commission on the important topic of affordable housing. As a follow-up to this webinar, we will share the slide, as I said, with the connected participant, if this is fine with you, Lara. Also, the recording of the episode will be available on YouTube if you want to watch it again or share it with your colleagues. And as announced, we will be back in April, on the 22nd of April, for the second episode of our series, this time looking more specifically at short-term rentals and their impact on urban development and housing prices in cities. This episode will be hosted by colleagues from Prague Institute of Planning and Development. And I don't know if anyone from the Institute is here, and if they want to take the floor to give a short
several
teaser.
Several people are here.
Well, please, if you want, in 1 minute to present a bit the webinar, you're welcome.
Yeah, that will be probably my role. Hi, I'm Jan Sikora, and together with my colleague Zdeňka Havlova, we will host the next seminar, and we will talk about short-term rentals, as was announced, and we will use Airbnb in Prague as a case study. It will be more of an analytical presentation, probably, which will focus on the evolution and the scale and character of the Airbnb in the city, but we will also discuss the regulatory landscape, which is in place currently in Prague, and what are the main issues and problems that we are facing here in Prague. And also we will try to focus on the issues we have with the analysis of some reliable data and in general monitoring Airbnb in our city. So we are looking forward to hosting the seminar.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Jan. Sounds promising. I hope many of you will join us in April to hear more about this study that Prague Institute of Planning and Development led, and also how cities are organizing themselves to monitor short-term rental accommodations and their effects. So you can already register, actually. The link is on the slide. I will also paste it in the chat. And then I just have to say thank you for sharing your time with us. Take care and have a nice rest of the day, and hopefully see you all next time in April. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Lara. See you soon.
you.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.